Thomas, you're too old to travel. Be useful and water the hydrangeas, my daughter Lila said, tapping the countertop like it was a bell I was supposed to answer. Wendo, my son-in-law, with that permanent smirk, twirled the rental car keys as if he were hosting a game show. We'll send you photos from Honolulu, Pops. Maybe next time. I sat at their kitchen table with a lukewarm mug of coffee and stared at the clock. It was barely 6 in the morning, and already I was being dismissed like an old lamp they didn't know where to put. Too old, too slow, too fragile. I'd heard those words so many times they started to sound like my name. When the front door finally shut and their laughter drifted down the driveway, the silence felt thick, almost alive. I started tidying up out of habit, brushing crumbs into my palm, when I noticed something under a placemat. 4 printed airline tickets. My eyes lingered on the destination, Honolulu. Lila, Wendell, the grandkids all there. My name, nowhere. My throat burned, but I smiled anyway. Maybe it was the coffee. Maybe it was the realization that they'd just handed me a challenge without even knowing it. I stared at those tickets for a long while, then walked to the old cabinet, where Marjorie's photo still sat beside a seashell from our honeymoon. They think I'm too old, honey, I whispered. Let's see how far too old can go. The kettle began to whistle, as if agreeing with me. The next morning, the house would be empty again, but not for the reason they expected. Marjorie used to say, Eldon, life's an airport. People come and go, but you better know your gate. I used to laugh at that. Now I understood exactly what she meant. After she passed, I kept her folder of travel plans, color-coded, of course marked, future trips. She never stopped planning, even when her hands trembled too much to hold a pen. That morning, I found it in the bottom drawer under some old church bulletins and a jar of seashells. Her neat handwriting still danced across the tabs. Winter escape. Europe. Someday. And I had to blink twice. Hawaii. Final. My lips curved without permission. I knew what she'd want me to do. I booted up her ancient computer, which groaned like a walrus every time it turned on. Come on, girl, I muttered, patting the side of the monitor like it was a stubborn mule. After 3 false starts and 1 prayer, it lit up, and there it was. Marjorie's untouched airline miles, enough for 1 first-class seat to paradise. I leaned back in the creaky chair and chuckled. Guess I'm not that useless after all. My reflection in the dark screen smirked back at me, wrinkles, liver spots, and all. For the first time in years, I didn't look old. I looked ready. I printed the ticket, folded it twice, and slipped it into my wallet next to Marjorie's picture. Then I wrote a note for Lila and Wendell on the counter, right next to the bowl of fresh fruit they'd never eat. Water the hydrangeas yourselves. I left the house, locked the door behind me, and didn't look back. But before I reached the cab, I remembered something that made me laugh out loud. I hadn't fed the cat in 2 days. It had been 32 years since I last stepped inside an airport. Back then, tickets were paper, and nobody made you take your shoes off like a criminal. Now, I stood in front of the automatic doors, clutching my suitcase, a leather one from 1985 that smelled faintly of mothballs and pipe tobacco, and watched them whoosh open like I was entering a different century. The young woman at the check-in desk looked barely 20. Her name tag read Sierra, and her smile looked like it had been trained in a corporate lab. Good morning, sir. Are you checking any bags today? I looked at my single, battle-worn suitcase and said, No. This one's got more miles than your entire crew combined. It's emotional support luggage. She blinked twice before laughing, maybe out of pity, maybe because she didn't know what to say. Security was another adventure. I forgot to take off my belt, then forgot to take out my keys, then forgot I still had half a tuna sandwich in my pocket. When the scanner beeped for the 3rd time, the guard sighed. Sir, anything else? Just regrets, I said. But they don't fit in the bin. Even the stone-faced officer cracked a grin. By the time I reached my gate, I was sweating like a marathoner. I sat down, pulled out Marjorie's photo, and held it between my palms. You'd laugh at me right now, I whispered. You'd call me a show-off. A toddler across the aisle waved a cookie at me. His mother smiled apologetically. He thinks you're Santa. I leaned forward and whispered, Tell him Santa's on vacation. But as I watched the planes rise through the glass, one thought cut through the humor they didn't want me there. but I was going anyway. And for the first time in years, that felt like living. When they called for first-class passengers, I hesitated. It felt almost sinful. Walking past those long lines of tired families and businessmen glued to their phones. The flight attendant greeted me with that perfect airline smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Brink. Seat 2 amperes. 2 amperes, I repeated proudly, as if I'd just been knighted. I'd flown coach my entire life, knees kissing the tray table, babies crying symphonies beside me. But 2 amperes? That was a throne. The seat reclined so far back I nearly disappeared. I started pressing buttons like a curious toddler, and suddenly a footrest shot up, the reading light turned on, and somehow the stewardess's call button blared. "Sorry," I shouted as she hurried over. "Testing reflexes! Still got 'em!" She laughed, bless her, and handed me a warm towel. I wasn't sure what to do with it, so I wiped my face, then my hands, and then, for good measure, my phone screen. When the engines roared to life, I looked out the window. Clouds rolled like white oceans beneath us. I imagined Lila and Wendell waking up, checking the kitchen counter, reading that note. Oh, I could almost hear it. "He did what?" I chuckled out loud, earning a few curious looks from nearby passengers. I didn't care. Somewhere between takeoff and the first sip of complimentary champagne, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. The flight attendant leaned down and whispered, "First time flying first class?" I grinned. First time being treated like I matter. And as the seatbelt sign blinked off, I knew one thing for certain: this trip wasn't just about Hawaii. It was about reminding them who I used to be and who I still was. When the plane doors opened, warm air rushed in like someone had turned on summer itself. The smell of salt, coconut oil, and airport pretzels hit me all at once. I stood at the top of the ramp for a moment, clutching my hat against the breeze, and whispered, "We made it, Marjorie." The terminal was chaos, tourists in floral shirts, honeymooners glued together like chewing gum, and me, an old man in beige slacks with socks halfway up my calves, dragging a suitcase that squeaked with every step. I looked like I'd escaped a retirement home field trip. I stopped at a kiosk that said, "Lei, greeting $12. The young woman offered me a flower garland and said, "Aloha, Grandpa." "Grandpa?" "Oh no, sweetheart," I said, putting on my best grin. "Today, I'm a mysterious billionaire with a weak knee and a dark past." She burst out laughing and slipped the lei over my neck. "Enjoy your trip, mysterious billionaire." Outside, the sunlight was so bright I had to squint just to see where the taxis lined up. The driver was a big guy with a laugh that could shake coconuts loose. "First time in Hawaii?" he asked. "First time they didn't invite me," I replied. He gave me a side glance, curious. "So you came anyway?" "Of course," I said. "What's paradise worth if you don't crash someone's vacation?" He laughed so hard the cab nearly swerved. And as we sped down the highway, I caught glimpses of the ocean blue like glass, endless, alive. I couldn't stop smiling. But under that joy, a small voice whispered in the back of my mind. They'd find out eventually, and when they did, I'd be waiting. The hotel was the kind of place people post about online with captions like, "Living my best life." Marble floors, fountains shaped like dolphins, and staff so polite it made you suspicious. I wheeled my squeaky suitcase across the lobby, pretending I belonged there. The front desk clerk, a tall young man with hair shinier than glass, looked up and smiled. "Aloha, sir. Welcome to the Kai Grand Resort. Name, please?" I hesitated for a second, then said, "Eldon Brink." He typed it in, paused, and said, "Ah, yes, the Brink family already checked in yesterday." "Oh, did they?" I asked, casually leaning on the counter. "And what room did my family happen to book?" "Suite 1403, Ocean View." "Perfect," I said with a grin. "Could you put me somewhere nearby? Preferably close enough to borrow their sugar, but far enough to avoid their judgment." He chuckled. "We can do 1401. Close enough to hear them panic," I said under my breath. As the bellhop escorted me up, I thought about Lila's face when she'd realized her too-old father had beaten her to paradise. That thought alone was worth every airline mile and sore hip. My suite was absurd: big bed, balcony, fruit basket, the works. I took one bite of pineapple and nearly cried. "Marjorie, they've been lying about canned fruit all these years," I said to her photo on the nightstand. Then I heard laughter through the wall, familiar laughter. Lila's, Wendell's, the grandkids, my own blood partying next door, completely unaware. I turned off the lights, sat on the bed, and smiled. They wanted me to watch the house. Instead, I had a front row seat to their vacation. That first night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the jet lag, I was too busy eavesdropping like a teenager with a stethoscope pressed to the wall. I could hear Lila's laugh, high and sharp, the same one she used to have when she was a girl, sitting on my shoulders at county fairs. Now it sounded different, hollow, practiced. Wendell, meanwhile, had one of those laughs that made you want to check the bill. Every few minutes, he'd say, "Honey, this resort's worth every penny." I nearly shouted back through the wall, "You're welcome!" Around midnight, I heard their youngest, Chloe, ask, "Mom, why didn't Grandpa come?" Lila's answer sliced through me. "Because Grandpa doesn't like fun, sweetheart. He likes complaining." There was a pause, then the sound of a child's sigh. "I miss him." I smiled into the dark. "Me too, kiddo." The next morning, I caught them at breakfast. They didn't see me. I sat a few tables away, hidden behind a palm plant that looked like it had overheard a few family arguments in its time. Lila wore a big straw hat. Wendell was already on his second mimosa, and the kids were feeding pigeons under the table. The waiter asked if I was waiting for someone. "No," I said. "Just watching a live comedy show, family drama edition." When the bill came for them, Wendell patted his pockets and groaned. "I left my wallet upstairs." The waiter's face dropped. I leaned over just enough for him to hear and said, "Try checking under your ego." He turned around, eyes wide. Lila's jaw dropped. For a long second, nobody said a word. Then I lifted my glass and smiled. Small world, huh? You could have heard a pineapple drop. Wendell froze mid-sip, orange juice still hanging off his mustache like evidence. Lila's fork clinked against her plate, and little Chloe gasped, "Grandpa!" loud enough for the entire terrace to turn. I stood up slowly, like a magician about to reveal his final trick. "Morning, everyone," I said. "Hope you watered the hydrangeas." Lila blinked 3 times before words caught up to her brain. "Dad, how did you even... What are you... traveling?" I said, sliding into an empty chair. "You know, that thing old people are apparently too weak to do." Wendell tried to recover his dignity, but ended up choking on his toast. "Sir, you took our tickets?" "No," I said with a grin. "I found them. You left them like an invitation from the universe." The waiter came back, a bit nervous. "Will the gentleman be joining the family's tab?" "Oh, absolutely," I said. "And please bring me whatever that fancy omelet is they were pretending to enjoy," Lila hissed. "Dad, this isn't funny." "You're right," I said, cutting into my eggs. "It's hilarious." The grandkids laughed. Even the waiter cracked a smile before walking away. The tension melted for a second, just long enough for me to catch my daughter's face. She looked embarrassed. Yes, but also something else. Guilty. I softened my tone. "Relax, sweetheart. I'm not here to ruin your trip. Just thought I'd see what all the fuss about paradise was." Chloe leaned in and whispered, "Can you come to the beach with us later?" I smiled and ruffled her hair. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Lila didn't answer. She just stared down at her plate, the sunlight catching her eyes. And I could tell something in her cracked a little, not out of anger, but out of memory. That afternoon, the 5 of us stood on the sand like we were auditioning for a family we used to be. The ocean stretched out in front of us, bluer than forgiveness. Lila wore sunglasses big enough to hide a confession. Wendell strutted around shirtless with sunblocks smeared unevenly like war paint, and the kids built sandcastles that kept collapsing. Poetic, really. I rolled my pant legs up and waded into the water. It was warmer than I expected. like stepping into an old memory. Chloe ran up beside me, holding a seashell. Grandpa, look! It sounds like the ocean. I held it to my ear and smiled. That's not the ocean, kiddo. That's your mom, practicing her excuses. She giggled so hard she fell in the surf. Wendell approached, rubbing his shoulders. You know, Eldon, you could have just told us you wanted to come. I looked at him and said, Oh, I did. You just didn't listen kind of your family's theme song. He sighed. I didn't mean to make me feel like a houseplant? I know, I said, cutting him off. But it's funny. Even houseplants can grow roots strong enough to travel. For a moment, no one spoke. Just waves and gulls and the smell of sunscreen and second chances. Lila sat under an umbrella, pretending to read, but I caught her sneaking glances at me, the kind that carried both guilt and nostalgia. Then, out of nowhere, a beach ball smacked me square in the face. The kids froze. I picked it up slowly, glaring at it like it owed me money, then kicked it back toward them with more force than physics approved. It landed perfectly in Wendell's drink. Everyone laughed, even Lila. Really laughed. And for the first time in years, it sounded real. That evening, after the sand had cooled and the kids were asleep, I sat on the balcony outside my room, the one just a wall away from theirs. The sun was sinking into the ocean like a coin disappearing into a wishing well. I had a glass of pineapple juice in one hand and Marjorie's photo in the other. Then came a soft knock. It was Lila. She stood there barefoot, her hair messy from the wind, holding 2 small cups of hotel coffee. Mind if I join you? She asked. I gestured to the chair beside me. It's your balcony too. Just don't start another lecture about my cholesterol. She laughed quietly, then sighed. Dad, I owe you an apology. I didn't say anything, just watched the horizon fade to violet, she continued. I didn't mean to make you feel unwanted. I thought you'd be more comfortable at home. I turned to her and said, Sweetheart, I've been comfortable my whole life. That's the problem. She looked down at her hands. When Mom died, I didn't know how to keep us all together. You reminded me of her too much. It hurt. That one stung, but I understood. Marjorie was always the glue. I was just the stubborn piece that didn't fit right after she was gone. I reached over, touched her hand lightly. You didn't lose me, Lila. You just stopped calling my number. Her eyes shimmered in the fading light. You really flew here just to prove me wrong? No, I said, smiling faintly. I flew here to remind you that I still can. We sat there in silence, listening to the waves and the muffled sound of Wendell snoring through the wall. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like family again, awkward, messy, and quietly healing. The next morning, Lila knocked on my door before breakfast. We're going sightseeing, she said softly. Come with us, Dad. For a moment, I almost said no out of sheer pride. But then Chloe appeared behind her, holding a sun hat the size of a satellite dish. You have to come, Grandpa. We're going to a volcano. Well, that settled it. If I was going to erupt emotionally, might as well do it somewhere scenic. The drive up was full of awkward laughter and too many sing-alongs to Wendell's playlist of road trip classics. Who knew a man could ruin Elvis so thoroughly? The kids took turns guessing how deep the crater was, and I quietly wondered the same about my daughter's guilt. At the top, the view was breathtaking. Smoke curled from the mountain's mouth like a sleeping dragon. The air smelled like ash and forgiveness. I stood there, looking down into the pit, and whispered, You'd love this, Marjorie. Lila heard me. She slipped her arm through mine tentative, like testing cold water. She would, she said softly, and she'd probably tell us both to stop being idiots. I chuckled. That was her superpower. Just then, Wendell tripped over a rock and nearly rolled into the souvenir stand. The kids screamed, the tourists gasped, and I laughed so hard I nearly joined him. Gravity, I said, catching my breath, always finds the guilty. We took a family photo after that, Lila insisted. The wind nearly stole my hat. Wendell blinked at the wrong time, and Chloe gave me bunny ears. It wasn't perfect. But when the camera clicked, I realized something for the first time since Marjorie passed. I didn't feel like the extra piece in someone else's picture. I felt like I belonged in it again. On the fourth day, Hawaii decided to show us who's boss. The sky darkened like someone dimmed the world's lights. And within minutes, rain came down in thick, warm sheets. People screamed and ran for shelter, but I just stood there on the hotel patio, letting it soak through my shirt. It smelled like clean starts. Lila appeared with an umbrella, yelling, "Dad, you'll catch pneumonia!" I laughed, stretching my arms out. "Good. Then at least I'll get breakfast in bed." She rolled her eyes, but stayed beside me anyway. For a while, we just stood there under her umbrella, the storm thundering, the ocean raging, the world rinsing itself clean. "You know," I said quietly, "getting old isn't the worst part. It's being treated like you've already gone." Her eyes softened. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "I know," I said. "You were busy living. I just forgot how to remind you that I was still here." Then, Chloe ran out barefoot, screaming with delight, spinning in the rain. Wendell followed, slipping almost immediately, his flip-flop launching into a bush. The sight of him crawling after it while cursing under his breath had Lila laughing so hard she snorted. "Mom, you snorted!" Chloe shouted between giggles. Lila blushed. "I did not." "You absolutely did," I said, grinning. Sounded like a confused dolphin. She threw water at me from her umbrella, and for a split second everything felt right. Not picture perfect, not healed, but alive. As thunder rolled across the horizon, Lila whispered, "Maybe next time we plan a trip, you choose where we go." I winked. "I've always wanted to see Alaska." "You think I'm too old for snow?" She smirked. "You? Probably immortal." And for the first time in a long, long while I almost believed her. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the tiny hotel desk with a pen and one of those complimentary notepads that said, "Kai Grand Resort, where memories begin." I almost laughed. Memories don't begin in fancy resorts. They begin when you stop running from the old ones. I started writing to Marjorie. I never knew why I did that habit, maybe. Or madness. "Dearest Marge," I wrote, "I made it to Hawaii. Lila's here too, and the man who thinks floral shirts hide arrogance. The kids are sunshine with legs. And me? I'm somewhere between proud and exhausted. You'd love it." I paused, then added, "You'd be glad to know our girl's still stubborn." But she laughs again. Real laughter. The kind that comes from deep inside, not the polite kind she's been wearing like armor. A tear fell on the page, smudging the ink. I stared at it, then chuckled softly. Even my tears have bad aim. I slipped the letter into an envelope and left it on the nightstand beside her photo. I didn't need to send it. She already knew. As I turned off the lamp, I heard a knock. It was Wendell, barefoot and sheepish. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "No. I just wanted to say thanks. For coming. For not letting her push you away." I smiled faintly. "You married her. You think I had a choice." He laughed. "Fair point." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, two men who'd spent years pretending they didn't care about each other, finally out of excuses. "Good night, son," I said quietly. He blinked, then nodded. "Good night, Dad." As the door clicked shut, I whispered to the dark, "She heard that too, Marge, didn't she?" The next morning felt different, lighter somehow. Like the island itself had forgiven us. The storm had washed everything clean. Even the air smelled new. I came down to breakfast early, wearing the loudest Hawaiian shirt I could find at the gift shop. It had flamingos, pineapples, and for reasons unknown, a random ukulele. The waiter took one look and said, "Sir, that shirt's a mood." "Good," I said, "because I'm done being wallpaper." Lila and the family joined me a few minutes later. She froze when she saw the shirt. "Dad, you look like a vacation brochure exploded." "Exactly the point," I said, sipping my coffee. "Might as well blend in with the chaos." We ate quietly at first. Wendell was unusually polite, even offered me the last slice of pineapple. "Guilt looks good on you," I said. He grinned. "I prefer to call it respect. Keep practicing, son. You're getting close." Then Lila leaned across the table. Dad, I don't say this enough, but thank you. For what? I asked. For reminding me that growing older doesn't mean growing smaller. I raised my glass. And for reminding me that children aren't always smarter than their parents, just louder. Chloe suddenly shouted, Group hug! And before I could escape, I was smothered in sunscreen, syrup, and forgiveness. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, but I didn't care. When they let go, Lila wiped her eyes and said softly, You're still coming home with us, right? I smiled. Eventually. But I think I'll stay a few more days. Me and Marjorie have a few sunrises to catch up on. They didn't argue this time. They just smiled. As they walked away toward the taxi, I waved, holding my coffee high like a salute. And when the door closed behind them, I let out the laugh I'd been holding in all week. Because finally, I wasn't the man left behind. I stayed 2 more days, just me and the sea. No schedules, no noise, no one reminding me what I couldn't do. I woke before dawn and walked the beach barefoot. The sand still cool, the waves whispering like old friends. The horizon began to glow, slow, golden, certain, and for a moment, I swear I felt Marjorie beside me, not as a memory, but as warmth. I sat on a driftwood log and whispered, We did it, Marge! She's laughing again. And I'm still standing. A fisherman passed by and nodded. Beautiful morning, sir. Every morning is, once you stop waiting for permission to live it, I said. He smiled like he understood. I took off my hat, let the wind take it, and watched it dance across the water. That old man who stayed behind, who was told to watch the house, he was gone. What remained was lighter, smaller maybe, but free. Before heading back, I stopped at the concierge desk and mailed one last envelope, the letter I wrote to Marjorie. On the back, I scribbled, If lost, please deliver to the next person who forgets they're alive. Then I looked around the lobby, tourists rushing, phones buzzing, life moving too fast, and I just smiled. Because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't part of their hurry. I'd already arrived. As I stepped out into the morning sun, I could almost hear Lila's voice in the breeze. You were never too old, Dad. And for once, I didn't answer. I just laughed deep, proud, and alive, letting the ocean carry it away. And before you go, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. I love reading your stories. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales where silence speaks louder than revenge and every ending feels like a new beginning.